Masterminds have been around for a long time, right? But unless you had a bunch of extra income to throw at it, you couldn't be a part of it. Well, we wanted to solve that problem. And so we're bringing masterminds to you for free. Welcome to Mastermind for the Masses. Hey everyone, welcome to Mastermind for the Masses. We are super excited to have John Noctor with us. He is the Chief Delivery Officer at the Service Desk Institute, and he's very gracious to be meeting with us on a Saturday because he is across the pond, and we had to make our time zones match up. So John, thanks for being here today.
Hey, real pleasure. It's a pleasure to be joining you guys. Thanks for having me on. And one thing to say, I might to you guys have a slight accent. So if I say anything you don't understand, please just get me to repeat, and I'll do my best. But no, true pleasure to be here. Thank you.
For sure, and you know, depending on where people are listening, we might be the ones with the accent. So yeah. But like we do, just want to check in with everyone, see how this week has been going. I can kick things off real quick. So professionally, I did actually, ironically, I got to be involved with an SDI event this week and presented with an awesome panel of speakers on AI and its transformative power and the ITSM kind of space. And it was just a really great event. Got to spend a lot of time learning and sharing, which I loved. And then personally, the kids are on spring break. So we took the first day of it here to kind of do some spring cleaning. So that's what I've been doing all morning before this so that we can just kind of relax and enjoy the time that they have off together. So it's kind of been my week in a nutshell. But Shan, what have you been up to, man?
Today and yesterday, I've been pretty much preparing for a local event. We're setting up tent set for tomorrow. It's a challenge always to try to get both brands ready and willing to kind of like pack and go and be set up. And usually, have a time frame of like 30 minutes to an hour to set up. So I've been focusing on that. But other than that, it's been pretty steady.
What's the name of the event, or where is it if people want to come out and support?
So it is it's a craft brewer. It's a local craft brewer. It's called Marker 48. A lot of people in the Tampa Bay area have heard of them because they're pretty big in distribution, but their main brewery is over here in Hernando County. So it's going to be there, and they do like a Sunday market last Sunday of the month where they have vendors set up, and of course they have it's like family oriented, so you can come enjoy a drink, but at the same time bring your dog, bring your family, go shopping. It's pretty fun. I enjoy going.
Awesome. So if anyone's in the Hernando County, Florida area, check that out. Marker 48. Colby, sir, what have you been up to?
Not much. It was the third full week at the new job. It's been going well. A lot more stuff that I was able to do this week. Kind of getting out of that initial training period, which is nice. It's just definitely a much slower paced environment. I think partly due to the specific company, but also because probably a lot of it has to do with the culture of living in South Carolina and not in Florida. It's definitely people take their time here a lot more, which is kind of nice in a lot of ways. And then outside of that, I got to finally go play some hockey. Like I was mentioning last time on the podcast, I went and did that like 3 times. I actually just got back got done at like 11:15 before the podcast, so got to do that, and that's been a ton of fun. Brings back a lot of childhood memories, so it's been a great week. So yeah.
So Colby, are you on offense, defense, mid? Are you just all over?
So when I've been going, it's like this. It's called stick time. It's like not an actual game. It's just like kind of open rink. You kind of like have both sides of the ice, like with the goalies, because goalies can like come in and just play for free. It's like $10 to skate otherwise, and you can kind of just like shoot the puck around, skate, do whatever, and just kind of practice. So the first day was pretty rough. Like I was having a hard time even staying on my feet and like stopping correctly. Second day was much better, and then today was a lot better because I played a lot when I was a kid, so I knew it would come back to me at some point, but it just took a few times. But it definitely has been very exponential each time, so I've been honestly pretty surprised at where I was at even just today. So I'll probably play some pickup games next week, but I'll probably try to stick to defense so I don't ruin the game as much.
Awesome. We'll see you back down here in Florida for the Lightning before too long, I'm sure.
There you go. Yep, that's the plan.
Oh, and John, I'm going to put you on the spot, sir. How's your week been?
Yeah, cracking week. I had professional wise, we had a strategy session just talking about business direction and ideas, and that was tremendous. It was a really great thing to be part of, and a lot of good stuff came out of it about the future of the SDI and what we're trying to achieve, and some initiatives. And on a personal side, even more exciting, my true passion in life is photography. That's what sort of keeps me going. So I managed to order a ridiculously large lens, and that came, I think, sort of last week. So I feel as if I've got thinking of Shan, I've got a new PlayStation game that I haven't been able to play for a week. So I'm looking forward to getting out with that, and I'm trying to get into a bit of wildlife photography. But yeah, it's honestly it's the biggest lens I've ever seen. So I think I might need to go to the gym so I can actually get a little bit more fit to lift it. But yes, I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, brilliant. Well, like we do, John, I'm going to put you on the spot a second time in a row here and just see what kind of question or, topic you brought for us today.
Yeah, I do feel you're getting your own back by putting me on the spot so much, Josh, after those audits we've been through. As soon as you invited me to this, I straight away I had an idea of what I'd like to talk about. And thank you for your bravery in allowing me to pick a subject, and this is the first you're going to hear about it.
Exactly.
So the subject is called psychological safety. Yeah, and it came about. It's something that I think I'd always sort of thought about, but there was no clarity to my thoughts. And a friend that I really trust and whose views that I really admire said, check out this book. You've got to check out this book. It will really start to shape some of your thinking and how we should be behaving. And I thought I'll go for it because I always sort of take this person's advice, and I won't embarrass him with a name, but it's someone you know as well, Josh. And so the book, I hope you don't mind me, I'm not on any commission or anything. But
Go for it.
The book is by Timothy R. Clark, and it's called The 4 Stages of Psychological Safety. And it's really how psychological safety leads to an innovation culture.
Okay.
And I was hoping that I could sort of take you through some of this. It's a pretty big area. And also sort of get your thoughts, ask you guys a few questions, and just see how you feel and see if it resonates with you as much as it did to me. Josh, I know you've done at least one book on leadership. We've got sort of leaders here, and as I was going through it, the more and more that I read what Anthony was saying, the more I thought, yeah, I'm signing on to this, and I can see some of the. I'll use the word constraints in a not too negative sense, but maybe some of the constraints that I'd faced personally in my life, and it got me to stop and think and address. And one of the things he says about the book is don't use it as a reference guide, use it as a call to action. So really, what psychological safety is basically where people can express themselves, they can take risks, they can drive innovation without a fear of judgment or reprisal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And essentially, Anthony puts forward that there's 4 stages. There's inclusion, the inclusion stage, the learner stage, the contributor stage, and the challenger stage as the 4 stages of psychological safety. And one of the things that I really liked is that diversity is celebrated, diversity of all types.
Yes.
And also that mistakes are opportunities for growth. And I thought, do you know what? I remember one of the first things I learned in industry, someone told me, in my experience, if someone's never made a mistake, it's because they don't actually do anything.
or they don't try. Yeah, exactly.
And so I thought this would be an interesting subject to get into. And actually, it was quite, and it was just ironic. I'd forgotten that Anthony in his book, and I'm hoping I'm going to do him justice here. And if he ever does see this podcast, please forgive me if I couldn't. We only got about 40 minutes, and it's a fairly filled book, and I'd recommend it to any leader. What it's interesting. He's an academic, and he came back from the UK to the US, and he was put in a world of construction where he sort of said, I'm suddenly leading this group of construction people, and there's quite a sort of sad part that led to the physical safety side. But what he realized was that there was also the psychological safety, where it was sort of easier for people not to say anything, just to sit there. So socially, politically, financially, just listen to the leader, nod your head.
Yeah.
And what he said was, well, how is that an innovative culture when people don't feel that they have a position of safety where they can feel included, they can feel that they are encouraged to learn, that they can contribute and they can challenge. And I guess we've all worked for leaders where they talk about it, but they don't walk it. And there's that sort of, that quite a strong word of fear. So psychological safety is a key to an innovative culture.
Yeah, and John, you mentioned it earlier that we've been involved in some auditing over the last few years. You've worked with my day job there and tried to make sure that we could rise up to the challenge that we were trying to achieve, that world-class certification level. And I don't think that can be possible without this psychological safety. I think it takes an entire team to be able to get you to perform at those high levels. And really, one of the things I've always kind of tried to make sure I focused on is I know the strengths that I have, but I also am pretty aware of most of my weaknesses. I mean, I'm sure there's some that I get blindsided by, but because of that, I've always tried to fill my team with people that weren't like me and people that bring different skill sets, different perspectives. But that only works if they have that psychological safety that you're talking about. If they can't share their opinions, if they can't express their ideas and have those be heard, then absolutely you're never going to benefit from that. Because you're right, some people talk that talk and they hire people that maybe are different from them, but then when they're challenged, they don't necessarily shift their direction, which maybe they shouldn't at times, but there are times where definitely I don't have the best idea in the room and the other folks around me do. So I think that's been a massive key to success in creating and I guess continuing high performing teams for me has been creating an environment of psychological safety. That's kind of my initial reaction to that. But I am curious, Shannon, Colby, you guys we've crossed paths numerous times in different ways, public, private sector, et cetera, nonprofits. And I'm just curious with your new ventures, like what are your guys' thoughts around the importance of that psychological safety? Because you probably don't feel it yet in your new roles to a degree. It's too early, I would think, to really have that level of confidence, but I don't know, any thoughts on that?
Go ahead,
the first thing that came into mind when John was kind of going over psychological safety, and this is the first time I'm hearing it too, so it's very interesting. But the first thing that comes to mind is it sort of something that has to be set up in like a cultural leadership method, or is it something that is kind of like self-deprecated, right? Like you have your own psychological issues, or you have your own blockers that are kind of stepping you and putting you in that psychological safety zone. You know what I mean? Like when you first explained it, I couldn't tell if that's something that you have to try to break down initially for yourself, and you don't feel safe, explaining.
I think that's a really good point, Shan. And he does sort of cover this in the book, and I think it starts off as very much a leadership sort of driven sort of psychology. That one of inclusion. If a leader doesn't drive inclusion, you can't be included. and certainly it drives through into the learner. You know, one of the things we'll come on to is a leader has to encourage people to learn. But you are absolutely right. If someone, even with encouragement, doesn't want to learn, there are those sort of psychological barriers, which is possibly a whole nother podcast to talk about psychological barriers.
Might be a book I'm working on, John. Just saying.
Yeah, it could well be. It could well be. But I think the point, Shan, is for me, when I went through the book, I thought above all, leadership has to drive this, but it's not a one-way street. You know, you have to embrace inclusivity. That I might have made up a word there. You have to want to learn and have that passion for it. You've got to perform so you can contribute, but ultimately you've also got to, I think, want to make a difference. So when you challenge, it's because you want that innovation and that drive. So certainly from both sides, I think it's a great question.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense. And we talked about, on a few episodes, we talked about where that can sort of be a barrier when it comes to leadership, and whether you're trying to grow in a professional environment or whether even if it's like kind of a personal environment, those limitations can keep you from really achieving a lot of your dreams or a lot of like what your goals are. And we commonly go to around the same verdict. And for me, for my personal experience, actually Josh is a great example, right? Like before, and for the audience who doesn't know, I used to work for Josh. He was a director of mine, but before that, I actually I stepped out in an environment where the psychological barriers were extremely high in terms of leadership. It was almost like just talking to a brick wall at times, and some of it's self like deprimented, like to where you might be afraid to kind of bring new ideas or new thoughts towards leadership, but the environment just wasn't correct for me.
Yeah, and Shan, sorry to just respond to that. I literally wrote this down because you've just touched on something, and that's why everything is interesting, Josh, Shan, everything you've talked about so far. I could almost point to the paragraph in the book, but I think that the author makes a really good statement. It links exactly to what you said there, Shan, and I'm going to just look down to get it right. He says, "The presence of fear is a result of weak leadership."
That's actually perfect. Yeah, honestly, that really explained it in a nutshell. Because once I left and I worked for Josh, he's the type of person to set an environment to where he's not only accepting challenges, but ego aside, completely ready for someone to kind of take a spot or even train or create an environment to where someone can easily fill his role. Like there's no real psychological barriers there in an environment like that. And I think it's more common than a lot of people think, but unfortunately when they're put in those positions, it creates that fear mongering, and it's almost like, I can't luck out. I can't find this kind of environment.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what shook me quite a bit in the book was when I went through, the sort of non-positive behaviors, the things that, are those barriers to psychological safety. What I realized as a consultant and auditor and through my experiences, it's frightening how many times I see it, and I still see it now. I still see fear. I still see, what would be a lack of psychological safety, and it sort of rocks me a little bit because I thought to myself, yeah, psychological safety. Oh, everybody thinks like this, don't they? No, unfortunately, it's far too prevalent in our world.
Well, what I've found personally is it takes a lot of effort to create environments like that, right? Because it takes a lot of effort, a lot of trust, a lot of respect, and really a lot of courage, to counteract the fear that even as a leader you may have, to kind of let go of the reins a little bit. And especially if you haven't had tons of experience, you really you might have been great at what you did as an individual contributor, but then stepping into a team role or a team leader role is definitely different. And and if you aren't properly prepared during training, which I do see, more often than not, probably, these concepts are difficult to come across unless you're actively researching it or looking for things like that. At least it's been my experience.
Yeah, I agree, but I think the effort, the rewards are exponential as opposed, in relation to the efforts. Having an innovative culture. Think to yourself, how many times have I worked in an organization, a team who I could truly say has an innovation based culture?
Right.
For me, far too few times.
Yeah. It was so interesting when you initially brought the topic and we're talking about it. I have the notion of like psychological safety tied with like you can never say anything like that could like sort of butt heads with anyone else. Like you can't have disagreement, and that's what I was worried about. I was like, oh, it's like I think the opposite. Like I think you should encourage disagreement, like in a healthy way. But when you kind of elaborate on it, it makes a lot of sense because it's like it's making sure that you can actually like almost in some sense like juice the value of your team members so that they can provide everything that they have within them to your organization, to your team, and in the best way possible. And there's a couple things that I think are really helpful for this in terms of like what you can do in a leadership position. And one of them was actually really interesting, and I think it was Steve Jobs. I saw this somewhere where he would speak last in his meetings because he didn't want people to feel like they would disagree with him, because people didn't want to disagree with Steve Jobs or like the manager of the company, right? They don't want to rock the boat. If they're a more agreeable person, they're not going to want to disagree with you. But if they have no idea what you think, they're just going to say their piece in like a good way, and then you're not going to take it personally because it's like, they're just saying their piece, they think what they want, and that's what I want from them, right? So I think that's one really easy way to do it. But then I think there's one really subtle way that not a lot of people think about. So when we're around people that we're working with, or our friends or family, we'll never talk ill of them, right? We'll never say or describe things about them in any negative light. Like we'll always sugarcoat things around them a lot of the times, right? That's what most people will do. But the moment someone does something that really irritates you, that you don't know, a lot of people will have a slew of epithets that they can throw at the person, or they'll assume the worst intent possible of that person, right? And when you're around the people that you work with, especially, and they hear you say stuff like that about those people, they'll think they just either like explicitly or implicitly, they'll think to themselves, man, is that what they think when I make a mistake? Do they think I'm stupid? Do they think I'm that I have ill intent, right? Like if I hear my boss saying like these like this person's stupid, they don't know what they're doing, etc., and then like I make a mistake and I'm just like, oh, does he think I'm just like blatantly stupid, that like it wasn't just like an oversight, or like I didn't think about something right? Like it's going to make me afraid to really put myself out there, because if I do something wrong, like is it going to be a big deal, like to that extent? And I think it's something so subtle, and I don't even think like people like that even notice it, right? They're just being freely themselves, and they may just be emotionally reacting to the situation, and there's that's understandable. But I think when you're in that position, you have to be more aware of how you react to things, because people will be afraid of you, even if you've never done that to them. So I just thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on, Colby, and I think that type of saying, that sort of pointing the finger, it's like the fickle finger of fate. If you're not in the room, let me tell you, the finger's probably gonna land on you. And it's one of the things, once again, that I took from the book was, as leaders, we want to increase intellectual friction, so people sharing ideas, having that opinion, being able to, not a lack of fear, being comfortable. But we want to decrease what we call social friction. We've all worked in teams where people say, that you get shouted down, or there's that feeling of being uncomfortable or being attacked, because that's what it is. You call someone stupid, you are attacking them. So as you said, the friction is good if it's intellectual based, but it's bad as if it's social based, when it's opinions on someone's sort of character or experience or knowledge. So yeah, I thought it, and what it led to. I'm gonna get a question in here if I can, Josh, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
So there's two types of bias, as we know. If we think of inclusion, there's conscious bias
Mm-hmm.
and there's unconscious bias. And I want to just ask you is, do you ever stop to think about your conscious biases? And link to that, how do you get to understand your unconscious bias? What do you do to understand your own unconscious bias?
Yeah, I think personally, I probably spend more time thinking about my unconscious bias than I do my conscious bias, right? And I say that because my conscious bias I'm aware of, and I can make adjustments in the moment. It's not hidden from me, so I notice it's happening, or I can logically go, oh, hey, maybe that's not accurate, or depending on the situation, it could help figure out whatever I've got going on. But the unconscious bias is the one that I really try to spend more time working on, because those are the natural things that are going to come out without me giving it thought. And I want to make sure that it's not influenced negatively in any way on what I'm going to do on my, I guess, knee jerk reaction, right? I tend to be somebody that makes decisions very quickly. So for me, it's very important to make sure that my subconscious is aligned with what results I actually want. And there are ways to kind of work on training that. It doesn't happen overnight, but really identifying, a lot of it comes down to reflection and identifying when you maybe made a mistake, and then trying to rewire your mind during those situations. Even as something as simple as if you're watching a TV show and a thought pops into your head, that has some sort of bias to it, you can kind of be like, oh, wait a second, or people watching or whatever the case. If you can catch it in the moment, you can kind of start to reframe how you think. And I think it's so important to focus on that subconscious aspect and getting that, because again, I really think that drives a lot of our instinctual responses, and it's so key.
Do you think for the unconscious stuff, the true litmus test is to ask somebody else what they think your unconscious biases are?
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole power of what we're doing here, right? Also, is it opens your eyes and you see other perspectives that maybe it goes back to what I was talking about earlier, bringing on people that are different from me, but then actually having an open mind to what they're saying and what they're bringing to the table, because my unconscious bias may be blocking one of those ideas. And hopefully, if I recognize that during our interaction, that's when I can start to try to train that again.
Yeah. That's interesting. Just before Shannon Colby dive in on that, I'll tell you my favourite story of unconscious bias. So I worked for a guy. He was the owner of the company, and we were expanding the company. And I put forward for different roles over a 2-year period or so. I'd taken people to second or third interview, and I had my favourite, and I put them in front of this guy, and he rejected them. Just didn't. No. He's the owner of the company. Didn't need a lot of data. He could make a decision. And it was only on the 4th time I said to him, I said, do you know it's strange? I've put 4 people forward that you've rejected for different roles. Did you notice? Because and it was just a coincidence, but they were all men and they all had a ponytail. And he stopped and he just went, yeah, I don't trust people with ponytails. And he went, oh, I've never really thought about it before. But he said, no, he said, well, I never got into the psyche of what had happened to the man. But he never thought about it before. And he said, no, I just don't trust people with ponytails. And he would not employ someone who had a ponytail. He felt they were, apologies if anybody here has got a ponytail, but he felt they were untrustworthy. How about that for a bit of unconscious bias?
Yeah. So, moral of the story: the 5th person you sent to him, you made sure they had
You
a
might,
haircut.
if you want this job, you want to look like this, basically. Yeah.
That's crazy. That's a pretty nuts example of it, to be honest. And I'm definitely in the same boat as Josh in the sense that it's mindfulness and it's self-reflection, because it's one of those things where there's a reason it's unconscious. Like you're literally not conscious of what's happening, right? So what tools do you even have for recognizing it after it happens? Because that's really the only way that you can a lot of the times is notice like the mistakes and not that's hard to prevent it because you're not even understanding that it's happening at the time that it happens, right? So it's one of those things where you have to be a type of person that can recognize mistakes you may be making. I mean, and the thing is too is that like you have to be a little careful because sometimes biases are okay to have, right? Like we all have like biases, right, for like who we're attracted to physically, right? Like that's not a negative thing. Like that, no one would say that's really a negative thing, right?
Good point.
So it's not that all biases are bad. It's just that you should have really solid logical and moral reasons for why you have those biases. And when you notice something in your life and you're like, man, like I have this trend. Like I've noticed a trend, or someone's like brought awareness to me of a trend. And I can think to myself, man, why is that? Like for instance, just to open up a little bit, like when I was probably, I would say like college age or so, I noticed that like being around like young teenagers like induced a sort of like annoying like rage inside of me that like I was like, wow, that's weird. Like why do I really hate these kids almost without even knowing who they are? Like, I'd be around them, just like I would just be like, yeah, this person, like I just don't like them, right? And like it took a long time for me to get to that, like get to the point where I realized it, but I at least noticed it. And then just come to find out, like a lot of it's because like I was like made fun of or bullied as like a kid by that age of kids. And so, like later on you're able to recognize like, oh yeah, it's just related to like childhood trauma or childhood experiences, right? And I think at a base level, that's where I think a lot of this comes from, is just childhood experiences and life experiences, and they bias you towards like, having a certain opinion of different types of people, right? And it could just be even their personalities, right? Like I'm more of a, reserved person. I'm not like really eccentric for the most part, especially unless I really know the people, then I kind of open up and be myself. But so I have a harder time interacting with people that are very like eccentric and are really out there. Like I think they're fun and interesting people, but they really drain me because it's so much. So it's just, I think it's one of those things, right, where you have to start to understand yourself. That like that part of self-reflection. You have to ask why do you have that opinion, right? If you can't answer why, that means you haven't thought about it long enough, in my opinion. And the more you just ask why, you'll come to a conclusion eventually. And you can ask other people too.
Yeah, I think a trusted person to sort of say, as I said, when I said to that guy about the ponytails, I mean, it is a funny story, but he said, I'd never thought about it before. But then he just blurted out almost like, the sort of chimp paradox was just told me straight away exactly what he thought. Yeah.
So, John, one of the things I love to do is flip the question around back at you too, and get some insight here. I am curious, as you've been going through the book, we've talked a lot today about leadership's impact on creating this culture and environment. But what about, as either the employee or the individual, are there any tips or tricks in that book, or do you have any that you've seen personally that help someone either overcome that fear, embrace an environment where they can feel psychologically safe? Because to Shan's point earlier, there are sometimes personal barriers that stop us. So are there anything included in that book or any insights you have around that?
Well, it's interesting that not so much in the book, but I think once the environment is right, then I think we've got to understand everybody's psychology and allow them to express themselves how they want to. And what I mean by that is, I remember as a leader, I always thought it was really good to give someone praise in a team meeting. You've done a great job, thank you. And what I realized that not everybody worked that way.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody likes praise in a public environment.
Mm.
And so I think people need to be themselves. And I guess we're still getting back to the leadership side. But I think I remember my nephew was really sort of, he's a completely intelligent person, like ridiculous level, but very, very quiet. And he was struggling in school, getting that sort of, we need him to speak up, need him to speak up, need to speak up. And he just said, I don't know how to go about it. And I just said to him, the way to overcome that is ultimately, I said to him, be the first person to ask a question, plan for a question, think for a question, because once you put your question out there, it sort of builds that sort of bit of confidence. So I think you've got to be who you want to be. There's no harm in being that sort of more quiet, reserved person. But if you do want to be heard, I think you plan for it. And don't, if you're a quiet person, once the conversation starts, you find it very difficult to jump in.
Mm.
Whereas if someone says, anybody got a question? I would say, take the brave pill, put your hand up in the air, and it almost doesn't matter what your question is. you will just feel good about yourself. Because it's interesting. One thing I will say, just, you know, and Colby, you disclosed something there, and I'll do the same. If you were to read my reports at school, too quiet, doesn't speak up, barely know he's there, far too quiet, never says anything, you know, polite kid, but basically, look at it now. I'm a trainer. I present for a living. I meet scary people like Josh who know the standard I'm auditing inside out and probably better than me. But seriously, I get up on stage, and that's from a. I think the point I got to was when I left school, I didn't want to be that sort of person. So I think if you want to evolve, you've got to put yourself out of your comfort zone.
Mhm.
100%.
And that's horrible. It's horrible when you do it, but confidence breeds confidence. Once you've done it and you think, oh, nobody's laughing at me, nobody's throwing rotten tomatoes at the stage, I might be able to do this. But it is a little bit of a journey. But I made a point of putting myself out of my comfort zone, and yeah, I often think back to that kid that was at school that would just sit there in silence for the whole lesson and not say anything. And I think the teacher would look at me now going, what happened to you? You know, can't shut you up.
Something just jumped into my head when you were talking, John. I've never thought of it this way, but you kept talking about getting out of your comfort zone, and I've said that numerous times too. But as I think about it, right, what you're really doing is extending that comfort zone, because you're not necessarily leaving it and not ever getting comfortable in that space. Maybe at the beginning you're out there in that discomfort, but as you do those things more and more, I feel like your comfort area grows. You become more confident because you're comfortable in more areas. And so because of that, you've extended your capabilities and what you're able to produce. And I think that probably also helps with the fear factor associated with that psychological safety that we've been talking about.
I agree. I think the fear of doing something is never the same as the fear of when you're doing it. When you're doing it, and I think that comes down to something that's in the book, is that it's the preparation. If you can do the learning, then you can contribute. And I think that's the other sort of tip for the individual is, embrace the learning, embrace the. We all want to be picked for the team. That's included. Some picture team is inclusiveness, but when you train for the team, when you train and you've done your practice and you've done your learning, then you earn the right to contribute, to actually play in the team. And that would be my other message: is embrace learning, embrace growth, and never stop. I learn something every single week. I learned stuff during the work we did together, and we'll do in the future. I think every week I learn something. I think, I'm just gonna, that's the other thing I say to people: be a sponge, even if your personal life. Sometimes I'll go to the local pub, as we call it, bar as you call it, and I might see someone just interact behind the bar in a certain way, deal with a difficult customer, and I think, I'm just going to take that, and I'm just going to file it in my backpack there for future use. So always be a sponge is the other thing. Watch if you see someone you admire, plagiarize how they handle themselves.
I've got another question for Shan here, because I've always been impressed with his multiple entrepreneurial efforts here. And, it goes back to kind of something you were just saying, John, about, being courageous enough to ask the first question or anything like that. I've often likened that to kind of like skydiving, right? It can be a scary thing to skydive, but really you only have to be brave enough to take one step. After that step, you're in. So, if you throw that question up, you're in. So if you can summon up enough bravery for a couple of seconds, and, Shan, I'm just super curious, man, because, you started Royal Beardsman when you were, I think, pretty young, right? And that would have taken some courage to step out on that. You've started All at Bay. And the things you do with that definitely require that bit of courage. So what's your approach to, I guess, facing that fear that comes from that psychological safety? Because in an entrepreneurial mindset, an entrepreneurial world, that psychological safety is not really there most of the time. You don't have anyone to rely on for that.
Well, I think the way John explained his childhood like really resonated with me, because I was that quiet kid. I was that kid that didn't take a lot of risk. I didn't play a lot of sports. I didn't have a lot of hobbies, but I kept it in the back of my mind, right? So like part of what I would say is give yourself more credit than
Definitely.
you normally would, because if you're already thinking in that manner, like, okay, I want to step out of this kind of psychological safety net, like if it's already occurring in your mind, well, there's very little, like you're ahead of most of the game, and there's very little additional efforts that you might need to take to actually achieve that. And for me, when I was young, again, like it was just like John. I was a quiet kid, didn't take a lot of risks, didn't have a lot of hobbies, but I knew I wanted to start capitalizing off of new interest, or I wanted to like try different things, or like learn different things. And for me, what has always worked really well, and why even though I didn't care for the movie that much, like in a comedic sense, it's always my favorite movie, and it's Yes Man with Jim Carrey. And we talked about this on the podcast before, because if you put yourself in the position to where you obligate yourself to whatever that interest might be, whether it's starting a new brand or business, or learning a new instrument, or going and participating in a sport you've never played in, like Colby getting back into hockey. It kind of comes down to your skydiving analogy. You really only have to have the bravery to take that first step. And for me, that first step is the obligation, right? I mean, tomorrow's a perfect example. Tomorrow's going to be my second pop-up shop event for my clothing brand that I've ever done. And I bought the tent over a year ago. And what actually got me doing it was 3 weeks ago was my first event. And all I did was I came across a flyer for a local event that fit the brand well, and I signed myself up. I paid the $150. And in a matter of like 30 minutes of finding out about the event, like I was fully obligated to go. And at the time, like if I didn't do that, I probably would have been like, yeah, next time, and just skipped over it. So I think it's definitely like a 2-piece puzzle for really like stepping out of your comfort zone. And I think it really starts with how John mentioned with his childhood, like that self-identification of a psychological safety net.
Yeah, I think so.
Figuring out to get out of it.
Yeah, I agree. I just decided that the person I was at school, or I was described at school by the teachers, wasn't going to define me. Because what I realized was that the teachers, focused on the outspoken people. Whether they were well behaved or not, they focused on those. And I honestly, the school years for me, it wasn't difficult. I wasn't particularly bullied, but I think it was an atmosphere of fear.
Oh yeah,
you don't challenge, you don't get picked on a team, you don't put yourself forward. It's easy to be just to stay underneath the radar. And I can remember thinking that when I started work that I didn't want to be the person that they described, and I wasn't the person that they described. So I think that's probably what set me on my career path. And Absolutely. It's interesting, one of the quotes that Anthony says in the book, I love this one, is the preparation to perform creates the desire to perform. And that's really, I think, brilliant. Once we've done the learning, when we've got the inclusion, once we've put our effort in, you want to do something with it, don't you? When we've gone on a leadership course, when we've read the book or had some mentoring, whatever it might be, the true power is taking that and that desire to do something with it. As you said, Shannon, taking that step into setting up a brand, putting yourself out there. I think congratulations. That's one of the bravest steps anyone can take. So good luck.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I would always challenge the audience too. Like think of the most fearful moment in your life, and then think of like post event. Like was there one time where it was as scary as you thought it would be? Great. And I don't think anyone could answer that with a yes. I don't think anyone could be like, yeah, that was like way worse than I thought it'd be, knowing that it was going to be fearful from the beginning.
Yeah. I say to people, it's a bit like, Dr. Pepper's. What's the worst that can happen? And that's what someone actually said to me. I was talking about being nervous about something. I can't remember what it was. And someone said to me, plan out in your mind, what's the worst that could happen? And I went through it and I thought, do you know what? I'm not going to die. Nobody else is going to die. Exactly as you said, Shan. It's you know, that when we look at the consequences of it, I think it's more in the business world. I'd say, you know, personal worlds can be very different, but in the business world, the if you're in the right organization, you know, mistakes are mistakes. There was another one I wrote down. I hope you don't mind if I can find it. It was just a great quote about mistakes are expected. Oh, mistakes are expected. You know, that we take those and we learn their challenges, and I really like that. You know, we don't want people to make the same mistakes again and again. But I think I've learned more from my mistakes through life than I probably ever had from things going well. If things go well, what have you learned? I don't know. Nothing.
Yeah. Well, there's less to reflect on at that point. And
Yeah.
like we talked about, reflection is so important.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. And
well,
and
I
then,
think
sorry, there was just
No,
one
go ahead,
last
John.
message that fear-stricken teams give you their hands, some of their head, and none of their heart. And I thought, oof, I love that.
It's a good one.
That is
Yeah,
a good one.
he's very good at these sort of little quotes, and I find those little analogies, little quotes, they resonate. They start my thinking. I'm thinking, yeah, if I've led a team that, for whatever reason, I've instilled fear in, then they'll do what I'm telling to do. They'll give me their hands, they'll give me some of their thinking, but none of it's innovative. But they won't ever give me their heart, and that's what a true team, as we know, has those common goals. Sorry, Josh.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say they'll do just enough not to get fired. I mean, that's really what you wind up.
Spot on. Keep your head down. Come in. Don't get fired. You've done a good job. But all that says is why would you be loyal to that organization? Why would you give anything of yourself?
Exactly. Well, I think this was a brilliant conversation, and I think it's a great spot to kind of circle around and land on some final thoughts with this. So, Colby, you want to kick us off with some final thoughts around psychological safety in the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm going to go down to the individual level, like the non-leadership level, because I think there's one thing. It's like it's great to have an environment where people do make you feel comfortable with expressing yourself. However, I think it's also an important skill to know how to push back against that if you're faced with it, in the sense that, like, you know, if you think that, like, maybe your boss is a bad person, but maybe they're just not good at making people feel comfortable around them. And I think there's always things you can do as an individual to make that better. And I think, like, being courageous enough to say something still in the face of a thing being uncomfortable, or this applies to learning a new skill, etc., right? Like, really putting yourself out there to do something new that you're not comfortable with. It's all, like, to me, like a lot of confidence based. And I think for me, what really helped me push forward in the face of all those things was, you pick one thing in your life, right? It could be a sport, it could be even video games. Like, it could be anything in your life where it's a skill and you've, like, got to some high degree of mastery in it. I think once you do that and you know how to channel it towards other facets of your life, you'll be unstoppable. Because when you master something and you get extremely good at something, it gives you a level of confidence that is unrivaled by anything else that you'll ever experience in your life. And the reason I say that is because once you have that experience, you know what it's like to learn something new. You know what it's like to fail and to look silly. You know what it feels like to have everyone watching you, right? Like, you kind of go through everything, right? And you're like, go from the fool to the master. And it's going to be the same when you do something else that's new again. It's not the things you may be doing are different, but the journey is very, very similar. That's the reason why, like, the hero journey archetype exists within storytelling, right? It's a very similar thing. And so I would just really stress people, it's like, channel that thing that you've done in your life where you were really excellent at it, and think about the times where you weren't, and you'll just be unstoppable. I think, honestly, like, you can be very selfish with your journey in that sense, and just push through adversity that you never thought you could.
For sure. Shan, what about you, sir?
No, yeah, I like exactly Colby's point. I think it's an opportunity to both lead up and lead forward. Psychological safety is something that I feel like any strong, compassionate leader might understand, but there might be environments that it's, it wasn't relative. It was a smaller team, or things were more of like a industrial mindset of things instead of innovative mindset of things. So I think it's a really important topic, and I really liked how kind of John brought it out and explained it, because it does really make you think about everything that goes in behind the scenes of like what causes you to maybe have a psychological safety net, and the way, you might have biased and unbiased opinions on things. I think that's an important subject of this matter too, because it's all kind of relative, right? Like stubbornness can keep you from being, knowledgeable, but it can also keep you from leading in a way that would promote psychological safety. So I thought that was really important. And when we started talking about biased and unbiased or unconscious biases, I think, it's really relative, and all that relativity comes behind a sense of almost like FOMO, right? Like if you're stubborn, you're set in your ways, you're comfortable, you're pretty much accepting that you don't want to learn anything new, or you don't want a team that can blow performance out of the water or create innovative thoughts. So really just stepping out of that mindset, to me, makes everything more achievable. And I really liked John's story about his childhood too. I think that really resonated with me, and I think it probably resonates with a lot of the audience. And people might be getting confused on like how they can really step out of that psychological safety net. And I think just listening to this kind of content, or even like looking for this kind of content, you're already there.
Okay.
Small steps are needed to really blow past that psychological safety net, and you're very close. And I think people just need to give themselves more credit than they normally do.
For sure. John, what about you, sir? Final thoughts around this?
Just final thoughts. Yeah, just drive inclusion, encourage learning, enable contribution, and welcome challenge, because then you reach innovation. And I think my final thoughts are, thank you for putting up with this English bloke rattling on about psychological safety. I've really enjoyed it. It's been a real pleasure to spend some time with you all.
Yeah, no, it's a great topic. And you started us off with a book. So I thought in my final thoughts, I would recommend another book that I found very helpful that ties in with this. And it was called Rejection Proof. It's by Jia Zhang. I hope I pronounced that right. But essentially, he went around and created 100 different areas that he thought he would get rejection from. And he recorded some of these things. But essentially, he'd walk up to a stranger and say, "Hey, can I borrow $20?" No one he's ever met, and he might get told no, but there's actually some really incredible things that he got yeses for. And, after this 100-day challenge, he felt a lot more comfortable, a lot more confident, and really did realize that the worst thing that could happen was someone just telling him no, or him not getting the thing he asked for. So I would definitely recommend that, but I think it ties in to what we're talking about here. He, especially from the individual side, he took it on his own responsibility to make sure that he created an environment where he felt psychologically safe wherever he was, which I think is really cool. But so that wraps up Mastermind for the Masses today. John, great topic. Thank you for taking time out and being flexible schedule to make time zones work. I just want to, ask everyone to post any comments, any thoughts you have around the podcast below, wherever you listen. That's only going to help us to improve, right? And we'll learn more about what you want to hear about. And that's why we do this, is for all of you. So please share your feedback with us, share the pod with your friends so they can benefit too. And we will see you next time on Mastermind for the Masses. Thanks, everyone.